Blackhawks fans, welcome in to Season 5, Episode 23 of the Four Feathers Podcast. Johnny Nani alongside Tony on tap and our guy, Luce on tap. How we doing, my friends?
Doing well, Jonathan. It's been some bad hockey, but we're doing okay. How about you, Ron?
Yeah, we're doing through this lackluster stretch of Blackhawks hockey, to say the least.
Yeah, right. Tony and I discussed on our last episode about some of this lackluster hockey. There's been some more of it, although there was a little bit of a bright spot in the middle there. We've got a bunch on the docket today, including some of that hockey that has gone on since we last talked here. More injury report. There were a couple of positive developments there, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk about Lukas Reichel, his situation, NHL All-Star weekend approaching, the Blackhawks status with that, potential next extension after we discussed a few of those on our last show. We'll ruffle some feathers per usual and take a look at what's on tap next. Before we do any of that, make sure you go subscribe on Tap Sportsnet on YouTube. Follow us on the socials at Four Feathers Pod and at On Tap Sportsnet. Join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you and feature your comments right down below us while we are live here. All right, boys, let's jump in. Since we last talked, the Hawks have had 3 games. They went 1-2-1 in those games. 1-2 in those games, Tony, like I predicted. And a couple of those were goalless efforts here, guys. It is tough to score without Connor Bedard on the ice, even when they play a decent game like they did last night in Vancouver, despite allowing the 2 early goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy when you actually look at the numbers. There's so many different metrics out there that just suggest how underwhelming this offense is without Bedard and how much he has truly had an impact on the team. I'm there with you, Johnny. I think the game in Vancouver last night was still a good showing. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks are ironically the best team in the NHL this year. I think that's a weird thing for Blackhawks fans to say after their recent stretch of seasons, but you know, they put up a good fight, but you just saw the lack of firepower, and it certainly wasn't enough against what's become a very good Vancouver Canucks hockey team.
Yeah, Ron, you put it excellently right there. I was happy with the Friday night game. Seth Jones getting on the board, Johnny. That was, I think, important. He's back. He's healthy. That's a name that we've missed in this Blackhawks lineup. He's not going to be the offensive guy that's going to come save this thing by any means or make it that much more interesting, but good to see him get on the score sheet. I was just more impressed, Johnny, that you nailed this right on the head with your prediction on our last episode. I'm still reeling from last night's loss, late night hockey game. And, we love those here, but unable to come away with the victory. And you know how much I hate Vancouver. So it stings a little bit, but it was expected.
Right, yeah, and then add on what Ron said. A little bit weird for us Blackhawks fans here to be sitting and talking about the Vancouver Canucks as the best team in the league. That's my overall points. I know points percentage probably puts them down about like 3rd, but they can't control how many games other teams have played. So they've taken care of business on their front. And like I said, after giving up 2 early goals, Blackhawks did put up a good effort, but man, it's just, we talked about it last week. Sounded like a broken record, but it is rough sledding without Connor Bedard. And then some of these other names that we'll get to in the injury report that are still on the shelf here. But just circling back real quick to this Islanders game that happened on Friday night at the UC. Good last win there before they go on the road. They will have a bunch of home games coming up in February, but it's going to be a little bit. After this upcoming stretch of games, there's going to be about 10 days off before the Blackhawks actually play again with the All-Star weekend in the middle there. So it was good to send fans home with a win on that Friday night game. Hey, finally multiple goals in that one. You had Boris Kachuk leading it off, and then Joey Anderson back healthy. Good to see him. I think he's been one of the better forwards among the guys that have come back from injury here. He got his first of the season. Jason Dickinson scores his 15th of the year. And like you mentioned, Seth Jones, his first of the year, and it was an overtime winner. Guys, Blackhawks got another coach fired. Isles moved on from Blaine Lambert, hired Patrick Waugh the very next day. I think it's hilarious that they've done this about twice now, because I'm pretty sure a loss, the Blues loss to the Blackhawks led to them canning their coach a couple of days later, earlier on in the season.
Hey, it's good to see. I mean, it's got to be frustrating for other teams, especially losing to a Connor Bedardless Blackhawks team. It's pretty demoralizing, I would say. I mean, you look at this roster up and down. I think that speaks some volumes, though, when they do win these games, that they can still outplay their opponents. And I remember just before that game, I think it was a tweet from Ben Pope that the Islanders locker room was bumping the music. They were having good vibes. And then they're leaving with the Chicago without their coach. So, way to play spoiler on a Friday night. That's all I've got to say on that one.
Yeah, it was a fun one just to witness. I think just seeing that, like I said, last home game for a little bit here, given the break in the scheduling that is coming up here. So, got a couple other notes on these games here. Foligno and Donato back in the mix. They returned against Vancouver in that loss on Monday night here, and then you got Mrazek taking on the lead share of the net, as has been the case over the past month or so. I would say we'll have a little bit more on Petr Mrazek in a bit here, guys. But title of this episode is Depleted Blackhawks Personnel and its its consequences. What's going on? What happens? Sure, you can go and point to all of this lack of offense that we're talking about, and sure, guys like Taylor Hall, Andreas Athanasiou, Anthony Beauvillier out, even Tyler Johnson right now. That plays a factor in it. But there's other things that come under this umbrella, guys, and one of them is someone like Lukas Reichel. And to me, they've tried everything, and it looks like he could use a stint at Rockford, but he can't be at Rockford because they have so many damn injuries, and someone's bound to get injured again on this last swing before the All-Star break that he needs to sit up, even if it's in the press box, and watch here, guys. I want to know your take on Lukas Reichel here, and do you think it's a product of some of these injuries piling up, why he hasn't gotten that, send down to Rockford yet?
I'll turn this one right over to you, Ron. You've got some things to say on Lukas Reichel, I'm sure.
No, I think with Reichel, it really, I think it's a day late and a dollar short on sending him to Rockford. I think the Rockford stint needed to come much earlier in the season than it has to this point. I agree with you, Johnny. I think the injuries certainly complicate things. It forces the team to keep him up because he has a healthy body and there is potential there, but he's gotten into such a funk. And I know we've talked about it separately between the three of us, not on the microphones and on the airwaves, of just the lack of confidence, the lack of kind of that swagger that he had even at the end of last season when he was playing really well with guys like Philip Kurashev and Andreas Athanasiou. It looks like that spark is missing. And to me right now, the best thing he could possibly get is going to Rockford and dominating at the AHL level like he did a season ago. But unfortunately, just because of the numbers game, and I think there's part of it that the coaching staff maybe is concerned that maybe he won't take it the right way. Maybe he'll take it as a demotion because he hasn't played well. And they swore that he was NHL ready this year. And I think he was.
Kyle Davidson swore, not Luke Richardson.
True. And I think, though, to a point, I think he was. I think, though, it was also under the circumstances that he wasn't going to be a center. And that whole experiment took 15 games to figure out. Then they moved him to the wing, and then everybody was gone. Every skilled player. You even look at last year, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, Lukas Reichel carried that line with Athanasiou and Kurashev. Did he? I think they just gelled well together because they were all what now we are seeing with guys like Philip Kurashev, very skilled offensive players. And Andreas Athanasiou ended up leading the team in points after the departures of Petr Mrazek and Max Domi a year ago. So I think it's a timing game this year for Reichel. I think he could have used the stint a lot earlier in the season. They wanted to give him a chance. And then by the time they were like, yeah, maybe he could have used that, the chance was gone because of the lack of healthy bodies, Johnny.
Well, I have a question then that brings up. Now you've tried all of these different methodologies here this season. You tried the prop up. Kyle Davidson tried propping him up as high as he could, right? And saying he was going to be a center and he's a for sure NHL ready player. And that was all great and fine during training camp. We all thought, hell yeah, that's great to hear because that means we're taking another step here with one of the young pieces of this rebuild here. And then Luke Richardson tried moving him off the wing, off of the center and to the wing, and that didn't really get the response that you're looking for. And then he moved him down in the lineup further, and that's kind of where he's been residing and not really showing many flashes here. Then he gave him the tough love, and he did give him a healthy scratch earlier on in the season. And now he's reverted. He came back and was in that lower depth role, and now he's back to the healthy scratch methodology here. Now this is where I put that the injuries are kind of forcing his hand here and that they would love to, Ron. I don't think it's a day late, dollar short. He's still two-way on his deal. He could go down to Rockford, and I think it is necessary for him if they to rectifying the issues that Luke Richardson talks about here. I think it should happen if Tyler Johnson and a couple of these other names come back at some point here. I would like to see it, and I don't think that rehashing the methodology already played out early on in the season is going to do any other sort of response. And this is the last resort in my mind.
Agreed. I didn't mean day late, dollar short in the sense they physically can't. A day late and a dollar short of it just right now doesn't make sense because there's not enough healthy bodies in the lineup. I mean,
Right.
no offense to these guys because they've played in the AHL, but like when your big scramble moves when Bedard and Foligno get hurt are going to get Rem Pitlick and Zach Sanford off of waivers because you're just praying to God there's a healthy, dressable body. I mean, that's where really it is in terms of the forward depth. I agree with you. They still can, and I think as soon as somebody's healthy, he's going to Rockford, and I think that's the best thing for him. I just think right now they're just caught in this terrible cycle of the schedule between the amount of injuries and just needing the health, especially on a road trip. I think that just complicates it even more because of logistics.
Right.
That he's going to be with the team at least until they're on to the break, and through that All-Star break before returning to the United Center on February 7th.
Yeah, there you go. A consequence of the Blackhawks depleted personnel there. That's where I would ramp this. Comments on Lukas Reichel, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, Johnny, you and I talked a little bit about this on the last show, but I agree with you guys. My question would be for both of you, if he does go down, do you see him making his way back to the NHL this year? I mean, at this point, you need to just give him some sort of stability. If he starts to play well down in the AHL, I can see the rationale for bringing him back up, but I think there's a second layer to this. He's more talented than some of these other guys that we're talking about. And he's got a lot more just development to do in order for him to be a key cog in this Blackhawks machine moving forward. I would say just scrap the year then. If you're going to send him down, that's just my personal choice. If you send him down, let him just ride it out in the AHL and gain that confidence back and come back next year instead of trying to force something again, because it feels, at least at this point, his game just doesn't work at the NHL level. As you said, they've tried almost everything already. So I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think he winds back up in the NHL if he goes down and, puts up a bunch of points in a 2-3 week span? Do you think it's quick, or do you think it needs a lot more marinating?
It's a good question, and I do think that he would return, though, because you saw even last year he bounced a couple of times, and I know that was probably part of their development plan at the time for him. But Rockford's schedule gets bunched, right? They play on some weekends where it's like they'll play like a Thursday and then a Friday and Saturday, or you might have like your random like one-off Monday or Tuesday games, but it gets bunched to weekends, it feels like. So I do think with those breaks within Rockford's schedule, it would make sense if he did show some life and some more confidence in his game to bring him back up in between some of those, just to see if you could have a little more confidence when you do put him back out on there, because it's not like he wouldn't fit back in the lineup. It's like, I guarantee they're probably going to have some more injuries, and like you had said, he's probably more skilled than some of these depth guys that are hanging around in the bottom six of the lineup. So I understand where you're coming from giving him some like sort of like bedrock of foundation and stability there, but at the same time, some of the other issues that we're talking about here could be at play further on in the season, because you got to remember we're in January right now. This thing's going until mid-April anyway. So
yeah, I don't really have much else. I mean, I agree with Johnny. I think they would bounce him back to the NHL at some point. I think it would be interesting to see him stay down at the AHL level, especially because come probably March 31st-ish, he should have some new teammates at the AHL level, as the Blackhawks should probably sign guys like Landon Slaggert and some of these other players that they very clearly have some kind of developmental plan for in the near future. Rockford's in a playoff position as of today within that central division in the AHL. So I think a playoff chase, potentially playoff hockey with some new teammates, maybe more skilled teammates than what are currently there at the AHL level. Seeing guys like Colton Dock get healthy and potentially get to play with Reichel could be something interesting. I think would be a lot of fun from a developmental standpoint, and just potentially from what it would do, I think, for the system to have another year of, we went to the playoffs. Maybe they go on a deep run and maybe you catch fire at the right time and you do win a Calder Cup. But I think it ultimately will be just, hey, go down there, kind of find your swagger again, and you're going to get shoved right back in the lineup at some point at the NHL level.
All right, staying on theme with our episode here and our title, another consequence of depleted personnel is you have a guy like Louis Crevier expected to play at the NHL level now with a guy like Connor Murphy on the shelf, with Nikita Zaitsev going on IR, some recent additions to the Blackhawks injury report. Well, I think Louis Crevier is another guy. We don't talk about him nearly as much because he's not as prominent of a name as Lukas Reichel, but he could probably benefit from playing down in the AHL more consistently. And I think that was the plan before some of these guys got injured. And then now you see him get run out there with Isaac Phillips, and they're the two that get burned for the 2 goals against Vancouver early on in this game. So that's just another, trickle down effect of what happens when you have all of this depleted personnel. All right, guys, another, consequence of this comes down to Connor Bedard, and it was actually announced now. It made it official by the NHL PR department just yesterday that Connor Bedard will not be going to the All-Star game, and his replacement will be Kyle Connor from the Winnipeg Jets, who also missed some injury time early on in the season. However, that means the Blackhawks will not have a representative here. I know we had talked about the potential of Jason Dickinson potentially slotting in there, but there's precedent for this. Seattle didn't get a rep last year after Beniers got injured. Vegas isn't going to have a rep this year with Eichel injured, so interesting situation here. But guys, do you think the league's probably hurting most from this one? No Connor Bedard at the All-Star game.
Not only is the league hurting the most from this, it's Blackhawks fans that get the short end of the stick here. I mean, seeing Bedard out there in the skills competition would have been just bananas for the NHL and for Blackhawks fans, especially in his rookie year. Would have been an excellent showing out there. Yeah, I mean, you're going to miss on ratings. You're definitely going to miss on ratings with no Bedard. So all of Chicago not tuning into the NHL All-Star festivities, that's going to hurt. So Johnny, yeah, it's double-edged, but I think we'll survive. The NHL, on the other hand, it's going to be a rough look, in my opinion. Ron?
Yeah, I mean, this was the year of Connor Bedard. The most watched game in the season so far was his debut night against the Pittsburgh Penguins. It outdrew the Winter Classic, which I think for almost every year running of the Winter Classic has been the most watched hockey game of the season for the NHL on the annual basis. And now you're not going to have him in your big dog and pony show event, which is the NHL All-Star weekend, and especially the skills competition, which I think almost more people enjoy the skills competition more than they do the actual All-Star game, even with the new 3-on-3 format that they've adopted in recent years. I think the NHL certainly loses out. I think Blackhawks fans do too, in a little bit of an aspect, because that would have been kind of another milestone of this season that, knowing it's going to be a bad year statistically in the standings, that at least you could have looked forward to. Like, oh, we could see Connor Bedard in action with open space on the ice against, some of the best in the league. Now everybody loses out on that. So I'm just curious if Gary Bettman has called Brendan Smith yet and told him that he's a fucking asshole for hurting Connor Bedard and ruining their ratings or not. But I think we'll learn more when the Devils ultimately let him walk in free agency. Nobody picks him up next year because everybody's going to be hurting from the lack of money.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, last question on that. Did Jason Dickinson get snubbed here?
I think so. I mean, the guy's had an excellent year. There is precedent for it, Johnny. As you mentioned, there's been cases where teams don't have an NHL rep at the All-Star game. I think it's a big miss for the NHL not to include him, because you still could have drawn some Chicago eyes. And he's put up a great campaign. I mean, this is a career year for him. I know that there's probably better options throughout the league, and that's what they're trying to go with. But for all intents and purposes, I think it's a snub all around. I'd even toss Petr Mrazek's name up there if you wanted to slot a Blackhawks player in as another name that you could potentially have sent there. But yeah, I feel bad for Dickinson in this situation.
Yeah, I think from the fan standpoint of it as a Blackhawks fan, I think we all would have loved to see Jason Dickinson in the game for all the reasons that Tony has mentioned. Unfortunately, from an NHL standpoint, they probably made the right decision based on what they want to do as a league wide. I mean, even with Kyle Connor getting hurt this year, he's still a point per game player, and he's still 5th on the team in scoring, which, I mean, the Winnipeg Jets are one of the best teams in the NHL this year. So they're looking at it from we get more of the best players from one of our top teams this year that's probably going to headline the playoffs for some capacity of April and in May and June. I think that was their thinking here was, well, if we can't get Connor Bedard, he's the pulse of that Blackhawks team right now. Everybody else just gets forgotten about, which is unfortunate because I agree. I think it would have been cool to see Jason Dickinson, but at the end of the day, they're going to take the bigger star in the NHL, which I think, Johnny, I know you can agree with this because you're a big Kyle Connor guy. Great player that I think doesn't get enough love nationally from the NHL as a whole.
Yep, you set me up perfectly there, Ron. I was going to say the homer in me says absolutely. Jason Dickinson got snubbed. You know how I feel about him. How are you now? One of my favorites to use the Letterkenny memes about, and he's had a great season. The breakthrough with the 15 goals had never eclipsed the 10-goal mark before, and it would have been cool. Even the guys in the locker room were starting to talk about it. The reporters had asked Jason Dickinson about the possibility of being selected as a replacement if Bedard wasn't going to make it. And this is about a week and a half ago or so, and he even commented on it. And he said, the guys were kind of razzing him up a little bit. Giving him some shit about, this, shutdown defensive forward, breaks through and makes the All-Star game. That'd be a cool story. So from the homer in me, yes, I agree. But when I look at it from an overall NHL talent standpoint, Kyle Connor is an electric player. So that is not a bad replacement in my mind from just a general NHL watcher standpoint. So we move on. No Connor Bedard at the All-Star game once again. All right, guys, we talked about a couple of extensions on the show last week with veterans in Nick Foligno and Mr. Jason Dickinson getting locked up to 2-year extensions each. There's been some buzz from Kevin Weeks over at ESPN saying that there's mutual interest between the Blackhawks and Petr Mrazek in working towards a deal, and something could come down within the next week. Now, this was last Thursday when Weeksy delivered this news update, and we are about 5 days removed from that. So do you think Petr Mrazek will be the next one extended here?
I do, and I hope so. He's had a tremendous year. It's been really fun to watch him. I think I've said this every time we've come on here since probably sometime in mid-November. He has far exceeded my expectations as the number one goaltender on this hockey team. The guys seem to play well in front of him too. He could get some more help, that's for sure. But Arvid Soderblom's been so bad that I think that you have to make a move. And if Mrazek is interested in staying, he's been healthy all season. Reward the man. It's plain and simple. I would like to see this, Ron.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think the Blackhawks look at the Soderblom experiment right now, and he's clearly not it. I also don't think they want to rush Drew Commesso, and obviously Adam Gajan, whatever we're going with the pronunciation here, but he's years away yet. Let's just call it what it is. So I think it makes sense. It's a bridge. I think they look at it from, I think the guys in the locker room respect Mrazek a lot. I think the organization does as well, especially after the really down year he had a year ago, to rebound and play as well as he has and stay as healthy as he has. And we're going to knock on some wood for that because we certainly don't want to see him exit the lineup anytime soon. But plus, guys, let's just talk numbers here too. You've got about $15 million between just 4 players falling off the books next year, and Jared Tenorti, Tyler Johnson, Nikita Zaitsev, and Anthony Beauvillier, all probably players that will not probably be brought back in any capacity. You need to fill some of that money, and Mrazek's 3.8 falling off the books as well. Makes sense to give him a 2-year deal for about $4 million, pretty comparable to what Nick Foligno and Jason Dickinson got. So I think it's coming. I just don't think they're in any rush to get it done. I think both sides certainly want to get it done at some point, but whether it gets done now or whether it gets done in March, at the end of the day, I think it still gets done.
Yep, good points all around there. I'd tend to agree with you guys, and I think Kevin Weeks is usually pretty reliable on this sort of stuff. He's been first on a lot of good NHL news, and him being a former goalie himself, he'd even name drop Jimmy Wayton there in their relationship that they have. Petr Mrazek working with him and doing things to stay healthy this year, which is a huge key. So once again, like Ron said, I'll knock on some wood here that Petr Mrazek stays healthy because that is big. The Blackhawks do need that. Otherwise, you'd be seeing a lot more Arvid Soderblom, Tony. So yeah, knock on some wood for Petr Mrazek, and I want the Family Guy memes to continue for a couple more years. So, Peter, word is the word. Let's go get it done. All right, let's move on. Next segment here, we will ruffle some feathers. We've got some nickname talk coming at you, guys. There's been an uptick in the usage of the nicknames on the social media channels, and I understand it. And what did I tell you guys last night? Like 99 seems like % of NHL hockey nicknames have like a Y or an IE at the end. And I get it. It's just a slick way to like call people. I mean, shit, think about Letterkenny, Shoresy, Jonesy, right? You know, things like that. It's been going on forever in hockey. For me personally, I just feel weird saying Bedsy. And I know that's been kind of, widespread, and it was given to him even before he joined the Blackhawks and all of that. And that's just what guys in the locker room called him and all of that. For whatever reason, I can't get behind it like I was able to Kaner or Taser, right? It's just weird to me. It doesn't sound right coming off the tongue. So if you want to use it, that's totally fine. I think I'm going to avoid using Bedsy as a nickname. If I were to shorten it at all, it'd probably be CB98. That's my ruffles and feathers here.
I'm not big on Bedsy, but there's one that is really just grinding my gears, Johnny. Just absolutely infuriates me. And it's starting to come out in the last week after Nick Foligno re-signed with the Chicago Blackhawks. What the fuck is Fliggy? I don't like it. I don't like it. It doesn't roll off the tongue. It doesn't even, I don't know, just because it's got an F in the, Foley is probably what I would have went with here. Maybe they didn't want to do that because of Pat Foley, but
I think it's this is one that's been around.
Fliggy, though. Where did we come up with this?
I want to say that if I remember correctly, Colin Blackwell, around like one of the times when he returned, that was the first time I'd heard it mentioned. But he had mentioned, just in an interview with whatever, talking about getting back into the mix and the leadership in the locker room, and he had said Fliggy, and that was the first time I'd really heard it. And then now, like you had said, it's being pumped out all over the place, and I can't say I particularly love it, but I feel like it's been in place, which is weird.
Yeah, I don't know if this has just been in the locker room and maybe the Blackhawks Twitter admin got a hold of that name at some point. If Foligno likes being called Fliggy, that's fine. I'm not going to participate either, just as you're going to bow out on Bedsy. I'm going to bow out on Fliggy because I feel like there's so many better nicknames for Nick Foligno.
I like ours, de facto, with the capital C.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's a good one. Yeah,
that's fine. I don't know. Ron, do you have one that just drives you nuts?
No, not really. I think you guys have nailed it in terms of the two that are weird. I think it's interesting because like there are some guys that just don't have names that fit the like cultural norm of hockey nicknames. Like if we think back to Kaner and Taser, like those are easy because Kane and Taves are very easy names. Like Bedard and Foligno are not just like simple names. So I think almost in the sense of like, I don't want to say it's them being creative because I don't know if it is because it still fits the like quote unquote hockey norms of the Y's and the ers and the that. But like, I think with certain guys, you truly do need to have more unique nicknames. I really do because some guys' names just don't fit it.
In a way, now that I'm thinking about it, it's pretty on brand for hockey players. I mean, you guys all know the cliches that come up. There's a great little skit about, stock answers win hockey games, and it's pucks in deep, pucks on net. And This is very on brand for that in how they come up with nicknames here. So I understand the origins of it. But once again, I think I'm going to remove myself from using the likes of Bedsy and Fliggy. So let's go on to Ron. You got a different one here. Moving off of nicknames for ruffles and feathers.
I do. I was very fired up earlier in the week, last week, about just the ignorance of people, I think, looking at the Blackhawks from outside, right? Because everybody says, well, you can turn around a rebuild so quickly in the NHL, and you can, but a lot of that also dictates on a few things. You need to draft high in the draft multiple years in a row. Check, right? Hawks did that last year. Seems like they're going to do it again this year. And you also need to have assets in place already in order to do that. And I think a lot of people, for example, I'm just going to call him what I think he is, the moron that wrote the article saying that Kyle Davidson should be fired, is just not looking at the situation factually. It's whatever's convenient for the narrative, right? Saying, well, they got nothing in the Taylor Hall trade. That's a load of bullshit. You got Nick Foligno, who's considered one of the best veteran leaders in that locker room right now. And you got a player like Taylor Hall, who just unfortunately got hurt 10 games into the season, who was supposed to be the Robin to Bedard's Batman this season.
And if you evaluate value going back and forth, it was Alec Regula and Ian Mitchell that you said.
Right. So, right. It was two players that weren't even going to be with the organization following the season anyway. So what did it matter? On top of that, saying that trading for Corey Perry and Rem Pitlick and wasting assets. Do you know the odds that a 7th round pick makes it to the NHL? They're very low. And as a matter of fact, I think Johnny, Tony, I think the three of us have just as the same likelihood to make it to the NHL as those guys do. It's just numbers. I'm not even trying to say it to be ignorant. I'm just saying it because it's factual. And to say that's a waste of assets, I don't think it is. But where's the argument of, well, Kyle Davidson has stocked the cupboard with top 3-round draft picks for the next 3 years in the foreseeable future after a very successful year of having multiple first-round picks. I mean, fuck, they turned Brandon Hagel and Jake McCabe into 3 first-round picks in 3 years. They turned 2 players who, let's be honest, on competitive hockey teams are fantastic assets. But on a team that was very clearly, probably for a lot longer than people wanted, needed to be torn down and rebuilt the way that they're doing it now. It was very lazy. It was very ignorant. And it was a take that I don't understand. I get Hawks fans want this team to be good. We all do. That's why we sit here on this podcast and talk about it. But the fact that people are going to say that Kyle Davidson should be fired when he's not even 2 years into his job. Oh, and they also said conveniently that, well, he only has a job because Bowman got fired. Sure, that's how job openings work. Guys got to get fired before somebody can get hired. But he didn't just get handed the job. They went through an interview process. He won it with interviews of other candidates. So to the person that wrote that article, I'm not even going to give it the light of day because I don't think it deserves to be read because it's that fucking atrocious. I just think you're really stupid. That plain and simple. I think your take is lazy. I think your take is ignorant. And I think you are not even remotely trying to state the facts because you are just using it to say what is convenient to your narrative. Congratulations on getting my blood pressure rose this week, but that's about all that the article accomplished. Anybody in Blackhawks fandom that's getting impatient, I think needs to just take a step back and look at what situation was entering the Kyle Davidson era. It wasn't much fucking better than it is now.
Right.
So patience is a virtue. And I think for Blackhawks fans, it's truly going to pay off because they're set up in terms of assets. And even if people are like, well, what if they don't hit with certain draft picks? You can trade draft picks.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but right, I think he's justified in this too because I want to say that that the same author brought up Seth Jones, even though that was a Bowman signing before.
It wasn't even a Davidson move.
And then you also, if you're really feeling down about the Blackhawks watching these losses night in and night out, my advice would be to go back and recollect that you already got the lucky piece. You already had the lottery ping pong balls fall in your favor, which is arguably the hardest part to do because it's 100%. Luck and you don't have control over that. And you just happen to get an absolute generational talent, the next face of the league, or at least is billed to be in that regard. So I think they'll be fine going forward, Ron. And I would go and double down your message of some patience there. So that's ruffle some feathers. That's what we do here at Four Feathers Podcast. We're getting close to closing this one down. Appreciate everybody tuning in here. Season 5, episode 23 here, talking about Blackhawks depleted personnel and their consequences consequences here. All right, we got a few more games before the All-Star break coming up here, guys. Last home stretch, it'll be the rest of this West Coast road swing. Wednesday at Seattle, 9 o'clock. That's a national game. TNT. Thursday at Edmonton, 8 o'clock. No Corey Perry expected to play there, I don't think, and obviously Connor Bedard out, so you don't get the Bedard McDavid show. And then Saturday at Calgary, hockey night in Canada, guys, 9 o'clock Central Time. That'll be on NBC Sports Chicago as well. What are we thinking? How are we going to fare these next few games? What do you expect in this final push before the break?
I'm feeling an 0-2-1 trip here. I think last night's game is a very good indication of what this team's going to look like. They're going to fight. They're going to make a hell of an effort to win games. But we kind of open the show with it. The offense is absolutely anemic right now. I think there's a chance that they force one of these teams. My bet is probably Calgary, just because they've had a lot of success against Calgary these last 2 years, and I don't entirely understand it as to why, but they have. You force them to OT, but maybe Calgary gets a lucky bounce or something like that. But I think especially getting Edmonton on the second half of a back-to-back is going to be a wee bit rough. And then I think Seattle is going to play better team hockey, unfortunately, because they have more offensive firepower. So 0-2-1 is my prediction before 11 days of Blackhawks free life.
We might not be full of sunshine here, but we'll give it to you straight. Tony?
Yeah, I'm probably going to ride with the 0-3 here. You know that Arvid Soderblom's going to start one of these games, and he's due for a really bad one. I could see that potentially coming in Seattle or Edmonton. It's just going to be one of those nights where you might fall asleep a little early and maybe not stay up for the whole game. But we'll be there with the Arvid Soderblom cheese meme on your timeline if you're still awake. And then the doors are getting blown off in one of these games, and I would assume it's the Soderblom game. You might be able to sneak, as Ron said, an overtime point out of this, but there's not much hope here, boys.
No, it's rough, and I'm probably going to have to go with 0-3, unfortunately. And I would agree with Tony that I do think the doors will get blown off in one of these games, and then the other two will be more reminiscent of what we saw at Vancouver. But even when you do lead a team in shots, even when you do pick up that possession game a little bit, and even when you do start to shut down defenders on defense a little bit more, like they were able to do after allowing the first 2 goals at Vancouver, there just isn't firepower in this lineup. And I know there was talk about Tyler Johnson maybe be able to join the road trip. Okay, he might add a little bit of a jam down low there, but they haven't even been able to finish the greasy chances in tight there. So I just don't see where any offense is going to come from. I don't think they're going to get absolutely blown out in all of these. It's not going to be just a cakewalk and we're ready for vacation here. I don't think that's going to be, coming from a Luke Richardson led team. However, the consequences of this depleted personnel, what I've hammered home all show, will unfortunately result in 3 more losses before the break. That's, like I said, might not be full of sunshine here, but we'll give it to you straight. Those are our predictions. So we'll see if Ron, being the most optimistic, them picking up 1 point with an overtime loss, comes to fruition when we check in with you during the week of the break. So, guys, it's been a pleasure talking hockey with you. Hit me with some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up and get on out of here.
Macklin Celebrini is going to look really good in a Blackhawks jersey next year, boys.
Ping pong balls again?
Maybe.
I would love that, Ron. I think you and I have talked about that. I'm not the most patient person in the world, so I feel like you were sort of talking to me when you were going through your ruffle some feathers just a little bit. But
Tony, I think like my last 3 ruffle my feathers have had some implication toward you, if we're being brutally honest.
Yeah, that's great. And I will continue to make you upset when we talk some Blackhawks. I was not the author of that article, though.
No, you were not. No. I would never stoop to call you an ignorant hockey fan, because you are not.
The theme reached over here, though, right?
Yeah.
So the being patient reached more than anything, more than the venting. Yeah.
I'm down bad. I want to be high on the Hawks again.
You are down bad. That I will #confirm.
Yeah. Yep. I'm down very bad over here. But it's always a pleasure, boys.
Yeah, I'll just say I enjoy. You know what? Even if they are losing these games, I still enjoy the late night, the West Coast swing. Tony, you and I talked about it on previous episodes. I missed the circus trip. It was always just kind of fun. It was like late at night. I don't know. It just feels like a little bit like I don't know. There's a different aura, different vibe to it when it's starting at 9 o'clock.
Dare I
7:30, right?
Dare I say too, with the circus trip, of why that one's missed so much is because it started to creep in around the holidays, around Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, yeah.
Which is why it was awesome because like. Especially growing up, right? You weren't at school, like you had the time off. The staying up late was like no big deal because you were up late anyway. Like
Right.
It had a certain aura to it that it really is, I think, sorely missed. Especially too, I think it came early enough in the season where if you have a new looking team that needs to gel, why not shove these guys together for 11 games? And I know the Hawks kind of had that to start this year, and that was kind of out of the ordinary, but. I mean, that circus trip was like the bonding experience. It felt like for every one of those cup teams during the run. So
Right.
I agree with you, Johnny. But there is an aura. It's fun when there's late night hockey.
Maybe the best thing that comes out of this is some more bonding, especially with some of the new guys in that locker room. Maybe the likes of Rem Pitlick and Zach Sanford get a little bit more integrated with them, and maybe that's a positive that can come out of this trip. I know they tried to highlight that when they got kind of bumped back in Buffalo last week. So we'll see. At least for my experience, I love John Weideman serenading me while I suck down a beer, while I'm watching these games late at night. So it's just an experience thing for me. I'm going to enjoy it regardless of the outcome. So we hope you enjoyed the show, regardless of the content. Make sure you go and follow us at Four Feathers Pod and at OnTap Sportsnet on the socials. Check out OnTapSportsNet.com for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. That's what brings you the Four Feathers Podcast. Until next time, boys, let's go Hawks.
Let's go Hawks.
Let's go.